Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Irma and I like to talk about everything writing, reading and book related, and today I want to talk to you about A Great Deliverance from Elizabeth George. So this is the first real book review in the Thomas Lynley series, and we're going to review the first book of the series, of course, and it's called A Great Deliverance. It was published in 1988 by Bethlehem Books, and I read the Dutch version of the book, and it's called Totdat de dood ons scheidt, and it's translated by Kobi de Groot and it's published by Bruna. So before we start with characters, plot, pace and everything that's book related, we need to start by judging the book by its cover. And I have both the books. I have the Dutch version and the English version in my bookshelf, and well, looking at the books, the first thing that I notice is that they're very different. So I'm going to put the photos up here and I can move my hands again. When I look at the difference of these books, I immediately notice that I like the Dutch version better, because now that I've read the book, I have an idea of who the girl in the front needs to represent, and well, I think that's pretty well done. So that's something that I like. And when I check out the English version of the book, then I think, okay, this is the farm where it happens, where the murder happens, but then when I read the book I realize that this farm has two stories and the house on the front only has one. For the color scheme I like the English book better because, well, it's grey and it's a bit dark and mysterious, which I think suits a murder, and the happy pink color that's showing the title is a bit throwing off. So for the idea of the front I like the Dutch version better, but the color scheme of the English version I think is prettier. And now that we checked out both books from the front, let's check them from the back, and I'll read you the English blurb. The Inspector Lynley Mysteries, Part 1. Fat, unlovely Roberta Tice is found beside her father's headless corpse, wearing her best dress with an axe in her lap. Her first words are, "I did it, and I'm not sorry," and she refused to say more. Inspector Thomas Lynley and D.S. Barbara Havers are sent by Scotland Yard to solve this particularly gruesome murder. And as they navigate their way around the dark labyrinth of secrets, scandals and appalling crimes, they uncover a series of shocking revelations that scatter the facade of the peaceful Yorkshire village. Okay, reading in English is not my best thing, especially not out loud. But that's the blurb, and now let's talk about the book. So the book starts with Pastor Hart traveling from Yorkshire to New Scotland Yard, and he's carrying a suitcase and he sneezes a woman in the face. After that we go to an office in Scotland Yard. It's the office from the superior of Lynley and Havers, and he is talking to his superior, and they're also related by marriage because they both married sisters. And you get a lot of information about their personal life and their career in the first chapter before you meet the stars of the series. In the second chapter we finally meet Barbara Havers, and this is a very slow chapter, just like the first one, and you'll notice two things right away. Barbara Havers has a very, very low self-esteem and she really hates Lynley. So that's how the series starts. And you'll get the information that she once worked as an inspector sergeant, but at some point she degraded, got back on the streets in uniform because she couldn't work with any other inspector, and she got in fights a lot, so you'll right away notice that she's a very angry, bitchy woman. And well, then she got a call from, well, do you want to come and work with homicide again? And she's like, oh, okay. And and in her head she's like, oh, who I'm going to work with? And she kind of acts happy, and then she hears she has to work with Lynley, and it isn't on the Ripper cases, which is a serial killer walking in England, but it's around a young woman who murdered her father. And even then she decides, well, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to work hard and stay positive. And then she hears she has to work with Lynley, and she's so pissed, because at that point she realizes the only reason I have to work with Lynley is because I'm not pretty enough to sleep with him. So, low self-esteem, a check. Hateful Lynley, a check. Let's start. She has the first assignment that she needs to do is to get Lynley on a wedding, the wedding of his best friend, Simon St. James, and his wife, Deborah. So Barbara is pissed off as she needs to go there and get him on his free weekend. So she goes there, and then you meet Lady Helen Clyde, Simon St. James, Deborah St. James, the father of Deborah St. James, and you get a lot of information about the guest, the house, the yard, everything. You also get a lot of first impressions from Thomas Lynley, and my first idea of Thomas Lynley was, he's a real Gary Stu. He's smiling and laughing, and he's perfect and good looking and charming and everything. And I was like, I'm not going to like this guy. So Barbara Havers needs to convince him that he has to come with her to Scotland Yard. And then you get a scene where he is saying his goodbyes to the newlywed couple, and you notice that there's something weird going on, but you don't know what's happening. At the end of this book you'll have a slightly better idea of what happened, but well, we'll discuss this after the spoiler part, because I don't want to spoil anything for you if you haven't read this book yet. You haven't written this book. I want to say you haven't written this book, but you didn't write this book, Elizabeth George did. You need to read it. So Lynley and Havers go back to the office, and Pastor Hart is also there, and he talks about the murder, and they're going through their files. You'll notice that everyone smokes, almost everyone in these books, because well, in the 80s it was way more normal to smoke, but that was something that I found interesting, because I was like, he's smoking, she's smoking, everyone's smoking. Didn't you know that this is bad for you? But they talk, and Pastor Hart already leaves, because he still has some church work to do. So he leaves. Barbara and Thomas and their superiors talk about the murder a little bit more. And Thomas is also looking at some pictures from the Ripper case. That's the third chapter, and you're like, meh. Do I really want to read this? And if you're at that point and you put your book down, please continue. It only gets better. So after this murder scene thing where they talk about the murder, you have this weird shift of characters where you go with Simon and Deborah St. James, the two people who just got married, and they got lost somewhere while driving to their honeymoon location, and then they arrived there. And if you're a bit familiar with England, you'll know that the place where Barbara and Lynley need to be is very close to the place where Simon and Deborah are. So you'll already know they're going to meet again in this book, because otherwise why would you introduce them? But that's something you'll also notice. And at that point I was like, well, this is an information dump and I still don't know a lot about this murder. Come on, let's get started. So like I said in my last video, I put this book down 3 times by now. I started with an audiobook, and that's when I fell in love, because after this book gets really, really, really good, I promise you. So after you get through the first chapters, which are very slow paced and with a lot of detail, you get a lot of information that's a bit more exciting, and you finally get to see how Barbara and Thomas work on the murder. There's still a lot of details in these books, but after reading it for a second time, the complete book, I mean, not the I like this, I don't like this, let's put it away, but after I listened to it with an audiobook and read it again afterwards, I realized why there is so much detail in these books. Because while I was listening to it, the information isn't as overloading and as annoying as that it was reading it the first time. And while trying to find out who the murderer was, you get so much information about everything in these books, in this book, in this story, in this murder. So after these first chapters, you'll finally go and work on the murder scene with Barbara Havers and Thomas Lynley. And you already know that there are some weird things going on between them and in their heads, and you'll get a lot of information about their personality with little hints and details that they're thinking and saying. And I think that's really well done, because at this point it isn't an information overload. You'll get to know these characters bit by bit, chapter by chapter and book by book. So I listened to the book the first time, like I told in my last video, and I liked it, but I was still like, there's a lot of detail in these books. And I was trying to solve this murder before they did. And the most important part was, why did the murderer murder this guy? So at the end of this book I was like, no way. You gave us so much information about everyone who was not guilty but who could be guilty, and now you're coming with this? But I started realizing something after I finished the book, and I was thinking about it, and I realized there were a lot of hints in these books that I just missed. So I went back and I read the book. And knowing who the murderer was, I was like, oh, she's giving us a hint here in plain sight. And Lynley asked the wrong question, but if he asked the right question, we had a lot of more ideas. And why is this quote used for something that I'm not going to tell, because then I'll spoil the book. But why is this quote used? It's so obviously that someone else knew that this was going on. And yes, to be honest, after the first time that I read this book, I started reading it again, and I was feeling so stupid. I was like, you're almost giving me the murderer on a plate, and you're like, here it is, silver plate, murderer on it, good luck. And I was like, well, I'm still searching. I mean, you feel pretty stupid after reading these books. But that's something for after the spoilers, and mostly for every book, because I read, I think, like 6 or 7 books in this series. There are 21 of them. So I need to read a few more, but every book again, I'm like, oh, I know who the murderer is, and I'm happy, and I realize that I'm wrong, or I'm right with all the wrong reasons. And then I read it again. I always read these books 2 times in a row, because the second time I'm like, you're so good at giving me all these hints, and I'm missing every single one of them. How are you doing this? Because it isn't that she did it really cryptic or something. You're just blind to see it. It's really, really amazing. It's really good. I promise you, you'll like it. Did I like this book and what would I rate it? Well, of course you already noticed that I really like this book. But I would still rate it a 7 out of 10 and not higher, because getting through the first chapters was really hard on me, and getting all this information and details and things that I didn't know what to do with it, that was something that made me put this book down and thinking I wouldn't read it again. So that's the reason why this book doesn't get a higher score. But after having the audiobook and reading it again, I really liked it, so I would recommend this book. And if you haven't read it yet, please do, and then come back, because now I'm going to roll the spoiler card and we'll talk about everything that you don't want to know before starting reading this book. Roll the spoilers. You're still here? Nice. Who did you think murdered William Tice? When I started reading, I was like, well, I'm so sure Roberta did it. And I know that Elizabeth George is going to give me some hints to believe someone else did it. And the murder investigation started, and even though I really wanted to keep my mind on Roberta did it, somewhere along the book I got new suspects. So my first suspect was Richard, William's brother. And I was so sure that he murdered his brother to get the farm before William married, and he would lose his right when William dies. So he was the first one on my suspect list. But then we find out about William's ex-wife and that they had 2 children instead of 1. So we learn about Gillian and we learn about their mother, and first we'll get the investigation going to their mother, because William Tice hired a private investigator to find their mother, find his ex-wife. And I was reading that and I was like, maybe she did it. Especially when you find out that she has this new fancy life, and I was like, she did it because she wants to hide that she was married before she met this guy she married. I don't know his name. We find out that the guy she married was pissed because she was married before, and he was my main suspect. I was so sure that he murdered William Tice because he didn't want to have the shame that he married an already married woman. And then we meet Gillian Tice. And when she was talked about in the book before by a lot of people, like her old teacher and her uncle, I was so sure that she had something to do with the murder. And then we meet her in person. Barbara is going to pick her up, and well, let's just say the way Barbara does that, well, it made me pissed off, but that's something else. So Barbara wants Gillian to come with her, and then Gillian locks herself in the bathroom and she starts hurting herself, and it's a really weird scene. And I realized that she isn't a suspect. I still didn't exactly know what happened, but the only thing that I knew was that there was a great reason that William Tice died. Well, Lady Helen gets Gillian and Barbara back to Lynley to meet Roberta, and at that point I knew that there was something off in this family, but I didn't know what it was. So Gillian and Roberta are put in the same room to talk to each other, and they're hoping that Roberta will talk to her sister. And in the beginning I'm like, this is going to be a bit useless, and then Gillian says something and I realized what happened right before she started telling it. So I wrote the sentence down, and it was, they say you killed Papa, but I know that you couldn't have. You didn't look like. There was no reason. And with those 4 words, you didn't look like, I realized what was happening. I still didn't know that William Tice was a pedophile, but at that point I realized that he was at least abusing his oldest daughter because she looked like her mother. And well, the second time I went back, I realized that this girl married William Tice when she was 14 years old, so she was a child. And Gillian was a child. And then Roberta started to talk. Well, let's just say, with this chapter, when Gillian tells about the abuse and afterwards Roberta tells about the abuse, and especially when she starts telling that she had a baby from her father, well, I put the book down way too many times, especially the first time, because I was really afraid I was going to throw up, just like Barbara Havers did. And even though I've read this book 4 or 5 times now, I still feel disgusted and sick when I'm reading that chapter. It's really well written, because you feel, at least I feel, everything that's happening, and it just really makes me feel sick and sad, and it's really well written, but it's disgusting. After the explanation of why Roberta killed her father, you have this throw up scene from Barbara. She tells about what happened with her brother and what she did to drive her family insane. The way she was talking to Lynley and how they were connecting on such a personal level, that was my feel-good moment. I needed that. I needed to have this scene at the end, so I felt there was something okay in this story. And then we go to Potter Hart. Seriously, that dude, he pisses me off. He knew this thing happened, he knew it for a very long time, and he just accepted it. And the way Lynley confronts him, I thought it was really, really geniusly. It was so well written, but yeah. I can't say anything good about this man, and it still irritates me. The graveyard for the little baby with the quote, and it was really something, the last few chapters. But the last chapter that made me happy was when Roberta, well, she needed to stay in the psychic ward, but her sister Gillian was brought back home, and they decided to not bring her home but to bring her to her mother, and her mother decided to let her in her life, in her heart again, and let's just say that was the feel-good feeling I needed at the end of the story. And I'm really happy Elizabeth George did this, because otherwise I probably wouldn't want to read it again, because it was just sick, and now it just had a bit of a meaning and a feel-good at the end. I'm a sucker for a feel-good at the end, even though it's just this little of feeling good after so much of disgusting and sick-making writing and story, but it makes it okay, it makes it bearable. So I'm really curious. Did you know who the murder was? Did you had the same experience as I did, like I know who did it and then I'm not sure, and then you started to give other people suspect rates, and you're just going through the book not knowing who did it, and just did someone else get sick at the end? I did, and maybe that's because I'm me, but I really hope someone else had the same feeling, because I felt pretty stupid but also pretty normal feeling this way. Did you unravel the clues? Because, well, all those clues about Miss Fitzallen telling that they need to escape from feelings and William being in his dressing gown or his pyjamas during the days, all that stuff. Did you figure out what was happening? Because I didn't, and I'm really curious if you did. So my last question to you is, have you read more books in this series? Are you going to read more books? I am reading the second book at this moment because I want to give a thoroughly good explanation about my opinions on the book, and I can't do that when I read the book a few months before. So I need to read it, then give my opinion, and that's the only way that I have this book clear in my vision and in my mind. Next month I want to talk about the second book, so if you like this and you want to read along, you have 1 month to finish the second book of the Thomas Lynley series. For now, I hope you all have an amazing day. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye everybody!